Today we're going to make this maple, mahogany, and aluminum toolbox. Check it out. My two friends, Izzy Swan and Tom from Tom's Tool Room, teamed up to make the drill-powered through wrench, and I'm lucky enough to be the owner of number 6 in the Signature series. I bought the set of sockets that fit the DPT wrench, and while the sockets themselves are nice, the plastic case they came in has nowhere to put the wrench itself. So I decided to design my own box. I wanted to design a box worthy of holding a tool this cool, so I inlaid the original name, the Nut Hugger, and both Izzy's and Tom's logos into the lid. The first thing I wanted to do during design was get into Fusion and model all the sockets. Since each of them were unique, I had to model the entire set to make sure that everything would lay out correctly. Once I had them modeled, I was able to lay them out in the box, make sure they were all at the right height, and then put things in order where they needed to be. After the box was completely put together, I started on the cam to make sure that my CNC would cut everything out properly. I always like to cut a first test part in foam to give me some feedback of how the design came out and if the cam is really working. I noticed in the foam cutouts that I did that the walls between the sockets were way too thin and they were just going to snap off if they were made out of wood. So I came back and put some fillet radiuses in there, and it really cleaned up the design of the box in general and just made it flow a lot better from one socket to the next. CNC time. I don't know about you, but I could watch this for hours. It's always amazing to me how you can model something in the computer and then it turns it into some kind of code that a machine reads to actually make the part that you designed. Watching it seems almost random at first, but then like peeling the layers off of an onion, it all starts to make sense. I always like to take my first run at a part slightly undersized and then sneak up on the line. This first run was 0.02 under, and as you can see, neither of the two wrenches fit in the box. The socket fit, but was a really tight fit, and I knew with any finish at all it would be tough to squeeze it in. So I went back and rewrote the profiles on size and then took another run at the part. You can see here that taking that last skiff takes almost no time. It's a simple thing to do to get a perfect fit for your parts. One danger of running individual programs like this is you can really screw up a part if you run the wrong thing or if you don't have your tools zeroed out. And that's exactly what happened here. I got a little crazy and a tool that was on ran right through the center of the part that I was working on. I turned to traditional woodworking and just glued a block back in place and reran all the programs, and since the part hadn't moved from its original location, it was a piece of cake to make the new block fit absolutely perfect back in the case. Of course, as luck would have it, as I got completely done with the block that I just put in, I ran the tool through another piece of the part. Instead of running the entire program for these two little bits, I just got my chisels out and finished it by hand. The last operation I always like to do on a part is run a bevel on all the edges. A lot of times the CNC tools leave a little bit of a ribbon at the top that can easily be sanded away, but if you put a nice bevel there, it breaks the edge and gives it a nice feel. The last detail to go on the face of the box is the size of all the socket wrenches. It'll be a handy reference since the sockets don't all index for the labels to face forward. Now we turn our attention toward the lids. The first operation is resawing the figured maple to give me just over a 1/4 inch for both of the pieces. I'm about to start the inlay process for the box top, and I've never done an inlay before. I'm going to be using V-Carve to do all the graphic work, but the first thing I want to do is take the boards that I'm going to use for the inlay and make sure they're perfectly flat. When I do the negative and the positive and they squeeze together, if there's any warpage in the surface, it'll read as warps in the text and graphic. A scary part in the operation. Once you have all the graphics V-carved out, the machine has to go into Etch-a-Sketch mode and clear out all the flat spots so the two halves of the inlay will fit together properly. If you haven't figured it out yet, I'm making two boxes, one to make my mistakes on and one to look pretty for all the pictures. So I have two pieces of the inlay that have to be cut apart so they can go onto two separate lids. Since these are V-carved, the more you sand out, the more detail you get, but you have to be careful because you can go right past where you want to be. I decided to call an audible instead of having a wooden lip around the sockets. I saw some shiny aluminum in the store and I thought it fit better with the character of this box, so I'm going to use it instead of a wooden lip around the sockets. Since I'm not able to rip the aluminum to the size I need it, I had to create some relief in the outside edges to allow your fingers enough room to grab sockets. I also needed to create a little relief in the front of the box so your finger has room to slide in and lift the lid. You can use the DPT wrench two-handed right out of the box, but it was made with a hole in it so that you could make a bracket to adapt it over for single-handed use for whatever drill you have. You just have to create the bracket yourself. As I was designing the box, I included a slot for the bracket, but I forgot to incorporate a spot for the nut and bolts that hold the bracket to the wrench and to the drill. So once again, I got out the chisels and went to work. For the little metric bolt that holds the bracket to the drill, I just had to create a little hole for the bolt to slide into. I can't tell you how proud I am of Tom and Izzy for teaming up to do this limited edition wrench. It was such a cool idea, and it was really neat for me to be present when all the design revisions were happening that made this wrench possible. I'm going to leave with a little bit of footage of the wrench in action. You can see how well it takes care of business when it comes to long threaded bolts that you couldn't get a normal socket wrench around. Thanks for checking out the video. I am going to have a fusion video that shows how I did the CAD and CAM for this project here in a couple weeks. I'll put a link above, so if you're watching this in the future, you'll be able to just click right on it. I'm also thinking about making the plans available if anybody else bought a DPT wrench and wants to build a similar box. I'm super happy with how this box turned out. It forced me to exercise some fusion muscles that I didn't even know that I had. I also tried my hand at inlays on V-Carve. I didn't know how that was going to come out. I was a little bit nervous about it, but man, I couldn't be happier with how the logos looked and the text looked on the box. I can already tell I'm going to be using that technique a lot in future projects. If you like this video and want to see more content like it, click on one of the links to the left or click the subscribe button and all my future videos will show up in your YouTube feed.